You might be wondering, what are we doing in Dark Souls 3 with all the Bloodborne coverage on the channel? And also, what did Bloodborne have to do with this? Well, I figured out parallax occlusion mapping, and I promised I'd make a video on this. I figured it out in Bloodborne, which is what allowed me to figure it out in Dark Souls 3. And for those who are not in the super nerd world of parallax occlusion mapping and understanding what that means at a glance, I don't blame you. No one really needs to know what parallax occlusion mapping means, but basically it's a visual technique that can take the bricks on this wall here, which is actually a completely flat wall, if we were to try to get up close to it, but we actually can't with the way the parallax is working. You actually well, specifically the DS3 camera not allowing us to. It hits the collision on the wall here. But parallax, basically, you can tell what it's doing is it's taking a completely flat wall, and then it is actually adding simulated depth to it by using a height map, which alternates between white and black, and sort of the, so it's monochrome in that way. And I will show you how I got it to work and why it was actually Bloodborne that is the thing that got me to solve it, essentially, or almost solve it. I also added parallax occlusion mapping to this tile floor so that the crevices actually stand out. And this is a technique that you might be wondering, like, okay, did FromSoft use this a lot? Was this in Dark Souls 3 or Bloodborne prior to you adding it? And it's like, yes. It was actually a function that they built into Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne and Dark Souls 2, technically. And I will show you now how I added it to this wall. So let's log out. And yeah, you might also be surprised. Are you randomly working on a Dark Souls 3 mod? Yes. In my off time. I wouldn't say off time, just whenever I feel like it. From working on the Bloodborne mod, I go, oh, okay. And it's because they work very similarly between the two games. Their material setup and the way that they render things, the file structure, all of it is very much the same. So here's the walls that we were looking at. And so I walked in here when I was working on this Dark Souls 3 mod, and I was like, oh, okay. This wall here is the perfect candidate for parallax occlusion mapping, right? Because it's a single texture, it is just bricks, and bricks work really well with adding simulated depth, right? And obviously you want to pick like wall materials or floor, as those are the best for showing off that sort of simulated depth. So basically, we check out, well, let me flip back to Bloodborne first. That's probably a good idea. So how did I figure out how to add this to DS3? We have to go back a bit. Now, you understand, surely, as a subscriber of my channel, of course, all of you watching this are subscribed, I imagine. So let's go to Bloodborne. This is actually a different Bloodborne project. It's not my remastered one. It's basically my backup one, if I screw anything up. And surprisingly, we actually go to Cathedral Ward. So we have to actually go to Cathedral Ward because that is where I found them already using parallax occlusion mapping. And that's the key to figuring out anything of how it works in a FromSoft game. Basically, that's my, also look at this guy. Oh my God. Let's see if we can find the entrance to Cathedral Ward. It's not down here. Back through here. And yeah, basically with any FromSoft game, it's essentially, can you find it being done somewhere else? If you can find it somewhere else in the game, you can reverse engineer that and understand how they're doing it, right? So that was my first thing, is I figured out that the floor in the Cathedral Ward lamp room, or your hub here, was using parallax occlusion mapping. And so if we actually load into Bloodborne real quick, let's try to do that. I try to do it on the fly so you can see exactly how it is loading into these. So let's see, let's go to Shad PS4. Okay, So that way you can see how easy it is to flip back in between the games and see like the file structure. I am using Reshade up there. I just recently put out a new version of my remaster mod for Bloodborne, and it strips out the... It actually strips out the anti-aliasing completely, because even with my improved anti-aliasing that I added to it, or found that extra mode, it's still FXAA as far as I could tell, and it was losing a lot of clarity. So I disabled it completely, and then there's a very simple reshade on top that literally does temporal anti-aliasing, real temporal anti-aliasing, and then contrast adaptive sharpening just slightly on top of it, and that much is a much cleaner image, and it handles it way better. But this video is not about that. It is about, on this floor right here, you can see that parallax occlusion mapping is being used. And it's actually really easy to tell in Bloodborne currently because of the emulator. It does not like parallax occlusion mapping at the moment. It will do it, but it has this sort of noisiness in the crevices where the parallax effect is happening, right? And so I can tell really easily this floor is using it. So once we figured that out, I was like, okay, cool. So now that I know that floor is using it, I get out of Bloodborne. I'm in my Bloodborne project. And essentially what you do is you go, okay, so that is model name 3000. Let's load up model 3000, which you'll find out is actually this floor. Ooh, looks kind of weird in Technicolor. But anyway, you can check out the floor model here, and you can click and it will show you the material index. So it is floor 002, and it's using, the material index 0. So it's the first listing is this floor here. And if you click on something else, it'll show you like, oh, okay, here's the other material indexes. So we have floor 002. Now what we need to do is actually go into our Bloodborne folder, which one of these will have Bloodborne. And there we go. You'll also see my file setup. Okay, so we have Bloodborne. We have to go to our map, because I want to pull up the original one, not modified by me yet. So we want to go to Cathedral Ward, which is M24000000. So here's the folder. It will store all the Fiverr files, which, as you'll tell on this right here, it says the model number is 3000. So as you can see, all of them are listed with the actual map name and number right in it. Or not name, Cathedral Ward, but M2400 is Cathedral Ward. So we go to, let's scroll down to 3000. They're obviously in order. And, oh, okay, it looks like I had already opened it. So we opened it in, you'll notice there's a Fiverr.dcx and then a .fiverr. So the DCX is just DCX compression on top of it that the game actually uses. And when I want to modify the material index, the different materials, I do commonly use the old Fiverr editor. And that's what happens when you hit Witchy B&D, and then you'll get this Fiverr file that opens up in the older Fiverr editor 1.971. If you double click on this one, because I have Fiverr 2.4, that opens it in the newer one. You might be wondering, why are there two different versions? Well, the old one still does certain things that the new one doesn't. So I still use the old one for this. So basically you go to material, and we know we're looking for material index 0, which is right here. And then this is where you'll notice, this is where they list all the different textures. But most importantly, they have the material setting here. So ARSN_L_P.mtd, and that controls which material setup they're using, because they have different ones for different things, for blend textures, there's a snow one, there's armor, there's all kinds of things. But the standard one is ARSN. That's your default. Because that's albedo, reflectance, specular or shininess, and the N for normal map. And then underscore, the L is for light map, underscore P is the addition here, is the really important one, which is parallax. So now you also might be wondering, well, how did you figure that out? Well, that's down to a different program called MTD Editor. And basically you can pull up, if we go to our Dark Souls 3 material file, which is stored inside the MTD folder. I know, stick with me, this is a lot. Or no, it's not actually. The shininess one is the specular, or shininess is the reflectance one. Specular is the. It's, yeah, they have, or no, actually the shininess is specular. Reflectance is the other one. I get those confused, but basically there's a specular and there's a reflectance. Those are the real, what they call them, G shininess, G specular. Don't worry about it. But yeah, you'll see here you have all your different listings. And I basically looked at a lot of them and I was like, oh, okay, so most of them are using MARSN_L, because it turns out that's essentially like your default. That's your default one that you use on most surfaces, right? And then you have one for edge textures. You have ones for alpha textures. You have emissive even. You have grass, deep snow. They created ones for all different things. And they have _3M, 2M, _M, and those are for like blend textures. And so Bloodborne and DS3 share these setups, which is great. They have essentially the same material file. It's slightly different in Dark Souls 3 and how they handle certain things. But anyway, so that's how I figured out _P. And you can see here the description is shininess, normal, light map, and parallax. So I was like, okay, so it is doing parallax, but it doesn't seem to be doing parallax the way that I'm used to. As anyone on the channel, I'm mainly known for a Dark Souls 1 mod called Dark Souls Remastered. And in that mod, you would actually, or in Dark Souls 1, or Dark Souls Remastered, you reference a height map. You literally just, in here, there would be a slot that says G_height for height map. And you would literally just say, that is the height map, you need to use that. But in Bloodborne and DS3, that is not how it functions. So basically, here's what I saw. I was like, okay, it's using parallax. I can tell that by the MTD entry. And then they have the specular, shininess, bump map, and diffuse. So then I go, thanks to Trivia, with how she was telling me how normal maps and specular maps sort of got more complicated past Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2. And that led me to, okay, they're probably storing it in the normal map, right? So now we know M24, 00, floor 002. So now we go to, I know, stick with me, guys. This is a lot, I'm sure. It will all kind of ish make sense. Maybe not. We'll see. So if I go back to my Bloodborne folder, and we actually go to M24, as that's where all the textures are stored. So now we need to find M24_00 floor. And it is alphabetical, so theoretically we should, because M24 covers Central Yharnam, Cathedral Ward, and Upper Cathedral Ward. Those are all under the M24 moniker, and there's M2400, M2401, which is Central Yharnam, M24, or M2402, which is Upper Cathedral Ward. So that's how you can tell which things are for what, but they're telling you what the actual texture is. So it's 002. So we have 002 here. You'll see _L. That is low quality. So don't worry about that. That's only for lower texture quality settings. Although in Bloodborne, they didn't actually have, you don't have the option of choosing those. So I don't really know why they had the low quality options unless they were automatically switching to them at the texture LOD. That's probably true. Anyway, so usually what I'll do is I'll pull up the albedo texture _A and then _N for the normal map, which is what they mean when they say G bump map. A bump map is a normal map, essentially. All right, so now we've opened up the albedo and the normal map. We are going to hunt for, usually what I'll do is I'll check the albedo texture to go, aha, that is the one I know. So the normal map, let's open up the normal map in Photoshop of all apps. And it says load alpha as channel instead of transparency. That is true. And here we go. Now we have our normal map, and this is where we can see what are they doing. So we have our red, we have our green, and then we have our blue. Now, by default, this didn't actually mean much to me. Well, I mean, it did. So basically, I looked at it, and I immediately was like, that is a height map. I know what height maps look like. Now, when you look at the other ones, you're like, oh, well, I mean, these are all monochrome as well, right? But you can look at this one, and it does not have all the fine detail and how sharp it is. Specifically with height maps, you don't want that. You actually want it to be very soft because the parallax will pick up on all those extra sharp details, and it will screw it up. So that's how I knew. I was like, this is the height map. Okay. The other thing you can do is quite literally just open up a different normal map in this game that was not using parallax, that was not referenced in parallax. So if we open up like 2400 brick 001, I was like, okay. And this is all just like the scientific method-ish of going, okay, I don't fully understand that, but what if I open up a different normal map? Is it using the blue channel as well? And it turns out it is not using the blue channel. So that was my confirmation of like, oh shit, okay. So that's how they're doing the parallax. They just shove it in the blue channel. Fantastic. That's great. I can generate a height map and then shove it into that channel. That's not, that's not difficult. I can do that. So that was my figuring out of the parallax. But it still didn't work. That's the funny thing. It still didn't work when I took this to add it to a different surface in Bloodborne. So what I had to do was actually the GX bytes that are down here, which from my understanding is probably the buffer layouts, which for those uninitiated, which no one should know this, but buffer layouts essentially handle what can be included on a surface. So is it set up to have a parallax effect? Is it set up to, by default, it will usually be set up to handle the albedo texture, the specular, the reflectance, and the normal. But could it also be set up to do a blend? And okay, so now we're going to have 2 slots for the specular. We're going to have 2 slots for the reflectance. And so the buffer layouts handle that. And so if it's not set up for parallax, it's not going to work. The parallax just doesn't happen. So I also learned that what if I steal the GX bytes segment from this working one and take it to another one, and that did work. But there's a wrinkle to it. It does not work with blend textures. So basically it only works, and this makes sense, it only works with these surfaces that are a single surface essentially, where they have the albedo, the reflectance, the specular, the normal, and then they'll usually have 2 slots for their light map, which is great. Those are the candidates that I can switch over to parallax occlusion mapping. And so now I can show you how I did that in Dark Souls 3. Because you might be wondering, well, is it different or is it exactly the same in Dark Souls 3? It is slightly different. So if we load up here, Dark Souls 3, and we go the Cathedral of the Deep, which is not my favorite level. Dark Souls 3 is not my favorite of the trilogy. I do love it because, of course, it's a great time. The boss fights are fantastic. Probably best in the trilogy. Actually, that's not even like I don't even think that's much of a contest. Like, yes, the boss fights are absolutely fantastic. So here is the wall in DS3 we were looking at earlier. And basically it is this map piece that's the inside of the bonfire room. And so it's 150. We open up 150, and this is what the actual texture looks like. And we have our wall surface here. Now this one is actually not what it used to look like. That's true. I should, this is after I had edited it. But let's pull up, I'll show you what I did. I know it sounds weird, but don't worry about it. So let's go back to Dark Souls 3, game folder. We are in M35. So let's go to M35, and then we have 150 already open. Because of course I already edited it, but I will show you what I did. I will show my work as my middle school science teacher, or math teacher. Yeah, obviously math teacher would say, show your work, even though like I could figure it out. They would say, you need to show how you did it, and I would go, I don't want to. I hate that. So now by clicking on this, we can tell what material index slot is the wall, which, as we can tell, handles most of the walls in the game, or in this room. So it's slot 8. We will go to 8. And here's what we're looking at. We have our albedo texture, which in this case is actually 32, and then they use wall 31 for reflectance, specular, and normal, which is an interesting thing. They normally don't do that. But I want to show what I actually started with was a blend texture. like this. So this is what I started with on that other wall. And I was like, shit, this isn't going to work for parallax because there's too many. I need to get rid of essentially half of these textures and pick the one I want. So in this case, like I did with the other brick surface, I'm going to actually go up in here. And this is what you also can't do in the new Fiverr editor. So essentially what I'm going to do is I switch this to ARSN_L_P. And then now I'm going to actually delete the surface entries that I don't want. And I had to figure this out, how the syntax for this is. So basically you go up until you get to your next type, and it's by the brackets. That is what's actually controlling how this looks. And so then I delete diffuse texture 1 and I rename this G diffuse texture because that's the one I'm actually going with. And then we're going to delete specular texture. And you can do this the other way where you only delete. Okay, I dropped my controller, don't worry about it. That happens every single time I'm modding. I don't know why I keep it on my lap, but I do. Anyway, you could delete the specular texture too, but in this case, it's the grass one I actually want to get rid of. So it does add the extra step of renaming them to specular texture 1, but that's fine. So you'll see the commas are in between the brackets to each slot. So we do type, and this was really just trial and error. As when you try to save it, if you fuck it up, it will say, you cannot save it. And I'm like, oh, okay. And it will usually tell you which line, which line number is actually bad, and you can try to fix it. So it was a lot of just trial and error of like, oh shit, okay. So, and then looking at other entries and going, oh, that's how it's supposed to look. Okay, got it. So let's see, G detail bump. The detail bump slot tends to not get used at all. I was used to this slot from, okay, I need a comma there. I was used to this slot from Dark Souls 1, but it also basically never got used. So we get rid of one of those. Then we have G displacement, which here's the interesting thing about Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne with how they do it. They have a slot for a displacement texture, which is where your height map could theoretically go. But for whatever reason, that's just not how it's done. So there's always that slot there, but it doesn't do anything. And I've never seen an instance where like it was actually used. That would make it easier if I could just reference it using that slot, right? Instead of the normal map, I guess. But for whatever reason, that just doesn't work. So anyway, I just delete the entries I don't want. I Thanos snap them out of existence. And then what I did is I basically copied the GX bytes. I copied the GX bytes into an actual notepad file. And I basically just copy them. And then I drag them in here. And bada bing, bada boom. Now this is set up as a single surface in the game. It no longer is using a blend texture. I changed the MTD to no longer be a multi-texture setup. I replaced the GX bytes. And you might think this is a lot of work to do just to enable parallax. And that's totally fair. There's no reason people should be doing this. But for me, it's fun. And so bada bing, bada boom. Then we look at the normal map. So we're going to actually go back to the one I already modified, which is the M35 wall 31 _N. So let's go back to Dark Souls 3 folder again. You'll notice there's a lot of map flying around. Like I go, oh, I got to go to this game, go to this game, go to this game. I do get lost because my brain is hardwired to look through these folders. So you might be wondering, how are you able to click through them so fast? I live and breathe this, so that's part of it. I have no life this hard. So here we go. 31N, and here you can see I was actually crafting the, I made my own height map by using a program called Later. And what you can do in Later, Laigter, in Later what you can do is basically, I want to pull up the albedo texture, which basically I just copy it into a PNG or convert it to a PNG file like this, and then later we'll take it and you can basically do this. And you can slide the actual like binary threshold for it. You also see there's a slot for height map, but that doesn't work as well. You're better off making height maps like this that are very, very monochrome. They're like the 2 slots, and then I alter the contrast on my own after the fact. And so basically, the other thing I figured out was which color represents what. So in Dark Souls 1, the white color handles the lowest point, and then black is the highest. So that's how you handle your elevation differences, and that's how it interprets it. Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne are opposite, where the black is the dark point, or the bottom point, and then white is the highest. So it's basically between those 2 different ends, and that's how it understands the elevation. But assuming you were to export this one, and I export it as PNG, and then what I usually do is I open it up in paint.net. I could do this in Photoshop, but to be fair, for some of these smaller things, paint.net is better. Also, this height map is not completely done yet or anything. I normally will do the focus, do the soft, and you basically want to play around with this to where you get rid of as many small dots as you can, so it's just like the crevices and it's not all the extra detail. So basically I get this, and then what I'll commonly do is the contrast. I will lower the contrast. So that's basically your toggle for how much parallax is applied, is what is the difference between the high point and the low point in terms of the color scale between the white and the black. And so that's a quick way that you can just reduce the parallax if it's too strong, because commonly it will be. You almost never want to use a parallax like height map that is purely black and white like this. That's too much. It all depends on how it interprets it, right? But basically what you do then is you open up the normal map, and I've already done it here. Here's where I figured out with Dark Souls 3 it's different from Bloodborne. So basically with Dark Souls 3 you have your red, you have your green, and then this is what the blue channel looked like. This is the one that was the height map in Bloodborne. And I was like, oof, this is definitely not a height map. And it turns out this is just junk data. Once again, trivia, shout out. She was like, this is just junk data, don't worry about it. Which means the only slot that was left was the alpha channel. And so yes, the difference between Bloodborne and DS3 in terms of how their parallax works is that you put it in the alpha channel instead of the blue channel. That's the difference. And then with DS3, you can save it as BC7 texture compression, and it works just fine. In Bloodborne, you are limited to BC1 linear, so it's older texture compression. Those are your differences. And that's how you can add parallax occlusion mapping to a wall in Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne. Technically, they both work for that. So I am working on a Dark Souls 3 mod. Reasons. I don't think there's a good reason for it, but let's go back in here again. So I've been adding this to some surfaces in DS3 that fit the mold for what would work for parallax, because not all of them will. And I haven't figured out the blend textures. I'm going to DM Great Graham Cracker and be like, hey, y'all get the hookup on blend textures in DS3 to where I can still use parallax? Because I'd really like to do that, because I figured that out in Dark Souls 1 with how it does its material setup. Also, I've been adjusting the G-params for the areas and turning off the hero lighting for Dark Souls 3, so you can see my character here actually gets really dark and then gets lit by the sun and then is dark by the shadows. The shadows are a little too dark currently. I will work on that. But yeah, dynamic shadows added to the whole world. It's very similar to my Embers mod, but I'm kind of doing it again. And then as I go, I'm adding parallax occlusion mapping and other things. I can show you the high wall of Lothric. I think that looks pretty good, actually. Really, this is all like in preparation. I'm also fixing like little things I didn't fix in Embers, where like, did this wall sconce? Is it in the wrong spot? Is it in a wall? Is it, and there's bugs and different things that I can fix in different fog settings that I didn't fix in Embers. So it's kind of fun for me to do it. And then I was also upscaling the textures, which are also in preparation for DS3 lighting engine. So all of this work carries over to that. I don't actually know much about how the G params are going to function in DS3 lighting engine. I assume probably not as much. It's all going to be handled by DS3 lighting engine. So that part of the work probably doesn't matter. But the textures and the parallax, cool. And then the bug fixing and the point lights, all that stuff will carry over to DS3 lighting engine, which will be fantastic. So let's go High Wall of Lothric. But really, it's been like messing with the contrast, and all of it is because I've been working on Bloodborne, and they use the same G param setup. DS3 has a couple additions here and there, but yeah, it's not crazy. I also modified the material file just like I did Bloodborne to lower how wet the game is. And so you'll notice Dark Souls 3 is less wet. There's puddles and whatnot, but not everything is wet, which is sort of annoying. And then you have greater contrast and dynamic shadows. And then I think I added parallax in the room up here. I could be wrong. Okay, also, and then another change, of course, which is already in my Embers mod, was the mesh LODs, because Dark Souls 3 was constantly mesh popping into a higher quality the closer you got. And so I turned that off, and there's different things like that that were part of my Embers mod, but it's all stuff I've just learned. I thought I set up parallax in one of these areas. I was running into like blend textures. Oh, did I fix this wall? I did, okay. Yeah, the shadows are too dark, I know that. I gotta fix... Ow. This is a wall I was trying to add parallax to, but I didn't end up actually doing it yet. Oh my god. But yeah, basically a lot of it is turning off extra point lights as well. That you'll see, like this used to have a blue point light. Dark Souls 3 has so many of them, but Bloodborne as well, where they put a blue point light that isn't really connected to any actual light source at all. It's literally just, we want to make this more obvious, which is totally understandable, and from game design standpoint, it makes total sense, right? But I definitely have turned that off because I don't like that. So it's kind of like my little touches to how the game looks and sets up, but a lot of it is going to be Dark Souls 3 lighting engine is the future, and we'll handle that. I will say the normal maps are fantastic in Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne, so you actually get really good depth just by their normal maps, and that's why they get away with it. And they do the same thing in Elden Ring, right? Where as far as I can tell, in Elden Ring they don't use any parallax occlusion mapping ever. Now, it's a huge game, so I'm probably wrong, and it's used somewhere, but I'm pretty good at spotting it, and I have not seen it. So, it was only used sparingly in Bloodborne, a little bit more than DS3, and then Sekiro, I don't think, used it at all either. They just don't like it. So, anyway, thank you for watching. If you're still watching this after, 30 minutes, that's not bad. I actually thought this was going to be longer. But thank you for watching. And I will see you in the next video.